So I would first like to thank the Sisters of Mercy for kindly facilitating this, enabling it to happen in this sacred space. It's always a tremendous grace to be together in a space where the divine is honored, where the sacred is known. So it is a grace to be here, to be together here. And from the very beginning of this exploration today, I would like you to include the earth as much as we are here together with the Sisters of Mercy, with the sacred that is here in this space already, to include the earth in your heart, in your soul, because this is a workshop about the earth, about the sacred within the earth and how we can evoke it and how we can call to it and how we can include it in our remembrance, in our prayer, in our heart, in our waking consciousness. So if we could just for a moment just include the earth, include this beautiful and suffering planet that is so sacred, that is so beloved, even as it is so wronged and abused. And this is really what I want to explore today, what is happening within this world in both the visible aspects of the world and also the less visible, the more hidden. We all now know about the ecological devastation that is taking place, about the climate warming and what that might do to this planet, about the toxic waters, about the oceans, that the carbon emissions are acidifying to such a degree that the species in the oceans are being depleted at an alarming rate. The coral reefs are going. And the depletion of species all over the planet, they say this accelerated species depletion marks the end of a 65 million year cycle. The last time species were depleted at such a rate was 65 million years ago. And this is the first time that such an ecological devastation has happened at the hand of man, of humanity. And I would like to remind you at the beginning that our sacred duty was always as a guardian of this planet. This was our responsibility as a race, as a species. Humanity was vice-regent or guardian of the planet. And this is what we have done, this is what we are doing. That is the conscious awareness of the present outer situation. And it is well enough documented that I don't need to go into it in detail. The waters are toxic. We have climate change. We have this tremendous depletion of species. And that is the outer situation. What I want to explore in detail today is the inner situation, which is in a way just as disastrous, but in a most extraordinary way not documented. It is in a way the great spiritual tragedy of our time that is hardly ever spoken about. It is one of the great secrets or taboos of what is happening. And I would like to say from the very beginning that I believe firmly in the ancient tradition that the world is a living being and the world is a spiritual being of which we are a part. And in the ancient tradition, the soul of the world is called the anima mundi, and it is a spiritual being. And it must be treated and respected and revered as a spiritual being, but something very sad, very tragic has been happening to it. And in a way it is our responsibility. It is a responsibility of each of us. Nobody is outside of the circle of responsibility, in the same way as when there was this oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico that caused so much pollution, that was so devastating. We all caused it. Everybody who drives a motor car caused it. Unless you live alone in a mountain and just live off the berries around you, you are part of the civilization that caused the oil spill. And similarly, we are all part of this civilization that has caused this ecological devastation, and what I want to explore in much more depth is the spiritual devastation. And I will kind of go back to the earliest roots of this. But first I should explain there is a basic spiritual teaching that says all change first takes place in the inner worlds. As there is this kind of cartoon, all change happens from within. What happens in the outer world is traditionally a reflection, a manifestation of what happens in the inner worlds. And part of our tragedy is, of course, that our culture has very successfully cut us off from any awareness of the inner worlds, of the sacred inner spaces. And this has had vast consequences. And I would like to kind of go back from the beginning and trace a little bit of the history of this. And I should first say that what I'm going to talk about does not apply to indigenous people. This is very important because we carry the history of a culture, most of us, that belongs to what one calls Western civilization, that is very different to an indigenous culture. And part of the nature of an indigenous culture, as far as I can understand, is its deep respect for the sacred within creation, of the sacred in nature, and an understanding of the inner worlds and upon which the outer worlds relate or have their foundation. And whether this was the work of the shaman or the priest, in an indigenous culture, they understood the balance between the inner and the outer, and they understood that you cannot live without a deep respect for the sacred in creation, and their whole way of life was a celebration and a sacred duty to keep this connection, to keep the worlds in balance, if you like. And yet we have inherited a culture that has very different roots, and I would like to kind of trace a little bit of that so we can have an understanding of, not of what went wrong, because I think that's too simplistic, but of the situation we have inherited and that is in a way our responsibility. And one can trace this right back to the beginning, if you like, of patriarchal culture in the West, and this image of a transcendent God. And I think a transcendent God is a wonderful expression, understanding of the divine. But it is not the entire vision of the divine. It is not the divine in its entirety. And I would just say, in Sufism we have two ways of appreciating the divine. And one is the transcendent. We say that God is beyond even our idea of the beyond. It is said no one knows God but God. And as a mystic, one just bows down before a God who is beyond anything one can say, anything one can imagine. This is the tremendous, awesome aspect of the divine, which, if you like, can be related to God being in heaven, although it is even beyond any idea of heaven. And then there is what the Sufis call the intimacy. We talk about awe and intimacy. And the divine is nearer to us than ourself to ourself, this incredible closeness of the divine. The divine is here, the divine is present in everything, in every breath we breathe, in everything we touch, everything in creation, everything in the substance of our own heart. Our heart beating is the beating of the divine. And many of those who have tasted, who have felt this nearness of the divine, come to see it reflected in the beauty and the wonder of creation. It is said, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. There is nothing other than God. So this is in a way a mystical framework of consciousness. These two qualities of the divine that, if you like, are two sides of the same coin. There is no split, there is no division. It is said, in this world, the divine manifests himself or itself in order to reveal its beauty, its wonder. And in this world, the hidden face of God becomes visible in the beauty and also the terror of creation, both in the lamb and the tiger, if you like, to quote Blake's poem. But there was a deep misunderstanding that happened maybe 2,000 years ago or more, in which the transcendent God became split off from the immanent God. And rather than a monotheistic God that embraces both the beauty of creation and also what is beyond the stars, there became a transcendent God who lives in heaven, and the world became, well, to quote St. Paul, he talks about the sins of the flesh. A place of darkness, a place of forgetfulness, a place of sin. That we should turn away from this world and look towards God. And this very powerful idea, which for me is always imaged in the spires of the Gothic cathedrals, that take you upward. I spent a lot of time in my youth around cathedrals. My father loved to take us every Sunday to a cathedral to hear the singing, and the stained glass windows and the spires that look towards the sky. And if you think in England, every little village has a beautiful medieval church, and it's mostly they have spires that take your attention up. And there became this split. And what people did not realize is that as the spiritual became something that belongs only in heaven and not in earth. And they say this is not an indigenous culture, this is in the Western culture we have mostly inherited. A certain darkness came upon the face of the world. And people didn't notice it really. It happened very gradually over many centuries, and still in medieval England you can see the beauty and the magic of creation. And in fact, in those great cathedrals, the Gothic cathedrals, I once spent 2 weeks in Chartres Cathedral, and I used to go very early in the morning and sit in front of the altar when the cathedral first opened. And I remember there was a schoolboy who used to come in through the north gate, north door, and cross through the south door. It was his shortcut to school. And every morning at a certain time he would go across. And as many of you know, the Chartres Cathedral is actually dedicated to the Black Madonna. It's on an ancient holy site that belongs to the Black Madonna. And it's a very feminine church. And I felt that the church, in a way, embraced the schoolboy who used it as a short passage to school, as much as the pilgrims who walked around it with a candle. There is a beautiful procession they do when they walk down from Paris traditionally, and then they circle the whole of the cathedral, each carrying a candle. It's a beautiful pilgrimage. And somehow she embraced it all. It was all part for her of the great mother, of the great oneness of life. But slowly over the centuries, there came this darkening of the sacredness of creation. And it happened so gradually people didn't notice, but it became even more dominant with the birth of science, the Age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century, and the birth of Newtonian physics, that the earth then became a mechanical object. that was like clockwork, that you could measure. Its soul began to no longer be present. People no longer related to its soul in our Western culture. And I'm a great lover of Shakespeare, and in Midsummer Night's Dream there is this trace in Oberon and the fairies and Puck of an inner world that is slowly vanishing from our consciousness. That the lovers in the wood, those of you who know the story, can no longer see the fairies, can no longer see Puck. Puck plays tricks, and the fairy king and the fairy queen are present, but they have become invisible. And it's this spirit world that is slowly receding from our consciousness in a way that a few hundred years earlier would have already been present. It's slowly vanishing. It's as if you like a light is beginning to go out, to do with the magic of creation. And this is very poignantly expressed actually in a poem by Wordsworth, who lived a couple of hundred years later, but he was a great nature mystic, and he saw the light and the magic in creation, and he also saw how it was lost. And I would just like to read this to you to give you this sense. It comes from his Intimations of Immortality. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he beholds the light and whence it flows. He sees it in his joy. The youth who daily further from the east must travel still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. And this is actually a very real experience when a certain light becomes lost. It is like the secret that many young children can see their guardian angel, but they quickly realize that their parents can't see it. And so initially they stop talking about it, and then they disbelieve it, and then they forget it. There's a line in one of E. Cummings, who is a great American mystic poet. It's from a poem called Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town. And it says, and down they forgot as up they grew. And there is this forgetfulness of the sacred in creation that is, children can see, they can see the spirit world, they can see we each have a guardian angel that looks after us the whole of our life. Children can see it, and we forget it. And this is like a subtext that has been happening over the centuries. It has been happening so subtly that we don't even know that it's gone. I always say we have forgotten that we have forgotten. It is a strange part of our human culture, I call it the burning of the books. It's happened quite a few times. For example, as you may know, this next year, 2012, has a particular significance in the Mayan calendar. And there's a whole tradition. They had a deep spiritual wisdom to do with time. And 2012 has a particular meaning. What is less well known is that they had enormous libraries, thousands of books, in which they put all of their sacred understanding. And out of those thousands of books, 3 are left. They were so successfully destroyed by the Spaniards. And this has happened again and again. The library at Alexandria was completely destroyed, all the wisdom there that's gone. And it seems to be part of our heritage as human beings is to try to eradicate the consciousness of the past, in particular, the spiritual consciousness of the past. What was lost very specifically in Alexandria when it was burnt was all of the spiritual wisdom that had been brought to the library. The sacred within creation and the light of the sacred within creation and our relationship to the light of the sacred within creation has been eradicated, has been censored from our consciousness. It has been censored so successfully that we don't even remember it anymore. It is not even in the stories of our mythology. You find it hinted at in the poem of a nature mystic. But it has gone. We no longer have a relationship to the inner worlds. And what people don't realize, because we don't even know they exist really in the same way, is that the effect that has had on the inner worlds. I would say from the beginning, I find it quite interesting that in our culture, in the Christian culture, there is still the awareness of angels. Apparently it's very common in North American culture. The people believe in angels. Angels belong to the world of light. They exist in the world of light. They're very beautiful. In Sufi tradition, there are angels of power and there are angels of beauty. And some Sufi traditions work directly with the angelic world. And it's interesting that they don't belong to the manifest physical world. And we have kept them. We have kept them in our consciousness. Whether we really know how to consciously relate to them, I am not so sure. But, for example, the Devic world that belongs to the world of creation, they are the inner forces behind creation, the devas. They're beautiful nature devas, beautiful nature devas. There was an experiment, as many of you know, at Findhorn in Scotland, to begin to work with the nature spirits again. And there is always the joke, as a result, in this very infertile land where they had this centre, they produced very large carrots. I'm sure they did more than that, but they brought a little bit into our consciousness. There are these nature devas that in other cultures in different parts of the world are very much part of the collective consciousness. But we've forgotten about nature devas, just as the whole world of nature spirits has actually receded. We can no longer directly access them like we used to. And I should say from the beginning that if we're in an ecological crisis, which is a crisis to do with the forces in creation that are now working against us, you know, we are interestingly destroying our own ecosystem. We are in this strange madness of a culture, of a race that is actually destroying what it subsists on. It's a very strange phenomena that you're actually destroying the very ground that nourishes you. The very air that you breathe, you are polluting. And you know, I would have thought from the very beginning that if you wanted to redeem the balance in creation, you should work with the forces within creation, which are, of course, traditionally the nature devas. They're some of them are very, very powerful. They understand the inner workings of nature. Just as, for example, in the shamanic tradition, how were the certain tribes taught the healing properties of plants, taught how to take the poison out of animals? How were they taught it? Not through experimentation, because the plants told them, because the animals told them, because the spirits in nature told them the magic, the healing properties within nature. There was a communication between the inner and the outer worlds that revealed the secrets within creation. And paradoxically, we have actually got to this place of ecological imbalance that is becoming catastrophic without any way of communicating with the forces within nature that understand how nature works. So we have made ourselves blind without even realizing we have made ourselves blind. And this is, you know, phenomenally stupid among anything else, because the nature devas are not just about growing big carrots. They're about the very forces of nature and how they work and how they can be healed and how they can be redeemed. But as we forgot, as the divine became transcendent, as the priestesses and all of the culture that supported the sacred within creation were burnt, were destroyed, were eliminated, so the inner world actually receded from our consciousness. It slowly separated. And I say you can see that in various traces. As I love Shakespeare, he talks about it. And the two worlds, the inner and the outer worlds, became further and further apart. And this is the heritage that we have. This is the, if you like, the secret that nobody is saying, which is that the ecological crisis is founded upon a very deep spiritual crisis in creation. It is not just because we are polluting the earth. It becomes from a very foundational attitude that we have in our culture towards creation, which I say an indigenous person would never even consider, because for them was our mother the earth. The earth was sacred. Everything in the earth was sacred. And if you have that attitude of reverence, then you wouldn't treat it in the same way. We have decided, particularly in the scientific revolution, that the earth is just a thing. And they actually did this very consciously in the 18th century. They said that, for example, animals cannot feel anything, so it is okay to do whatever experiment you like upon an animal because it cannot feel anything. And that is just an example of the attitude that underlies what is happening. But there is a deeper, in a way, much more tragic result of this, which, as I say, that the sacred, and remember the sacred, as you all know, just as your own soul nourishes you, the sacred nourishes creation. Without that sacred, a certain light begins to become lost. And just as in a human being, if they don't nourish their own soul, a certain light begins to become lost. It is part of the esoteric mystery of a human being that the moment you look towards God, God looks towards you. A light shines upon you. A light becomes more visible in you. You begin to have more access to the mystery of your own soul. And the earth also, if it is revered, if it is made sacred, it begins to have more access to the mystery of its soul. It is the same. Human beings are said made in the image of God, and the world is also made in the image of God. But as I say, there is a even deeper tragedy that belongs particularly to humanity. And there is a tradition that the soul comes into this world in order to have certain experiences, that you have an immortal soul. As Wordsworth says, not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. We come from this world of light. Our soul comes into this world to have certain experiences that have meaning to us as a soul, not as an ego, not as a personality, but as a soul. And they nourish our soul. And if you look in your own life, you can see there have been moments, if you like, when your soul was touched. They're traditionally called numinous moments. They have a numinosity, they have an energy to them, if you like, a divine presence to them. And sometimes they're echoed in dreams or sometimes in synchronicities. But your soul was touched. It was beyond the surface play of events. Something happened that nourished your soul, gave meaning to your life. And in a way, the soul comes into this world to have certain experiences in creation that are sacred, that give it meaning. And this, of course, has to do with the nature of the suffering in life, that through a certain suffering in life, we grow. The poet Keats talked about this world as a veil of tears that is also a veil of soul-making. And our soul grows. The divine in us becomes more numinous. And it does this because something in life comes to meet it. Something in life comes to meet your soul. And it can be just a moment under a starlit sky. I went for a walk this morning. We left early, but I was up early. I went for a walk at 5 o'clock this morning along the bay where we live. And the stars were all out, and it touched me very deeply. All the stars so bright, just as the dawn had not yet come up over the hills. And I could feel this meeting of my little human soul and that vast other. You can call it God, you can call it the divine. And those are the moments you treasure in your life. Those are the moments that touch you deep beneath the surface, because the sacred in you has been met by the sacred in creation. Or it can also be met by the sacred in another person, or the sacred in a beautiful piece of music. It touches your soul, it nourishes your soul. You are alive in a way you are not normally alive. It's not just thoughts or emotions. You feel you are alive. Now, the great, as I say, the soul, each of our souls comes into this world in order to have certain experiences that are meaningful and that touch it. And as I say, it is met by the sacred. But what happens, friends, if that sacred is no longer present in life? What happens if that light has withdrawn, if that energy has gone? What happens to us then? There is an expression in the Buddhist tradition about this. It's called a hungry ghost. It's actually what happens when life no longer can spiritually sustain you. And you become a hungry ghost. You are neither alive nor dead. You are neither in this world nor the next. And you are hungry because we are divine. Each of us, we are divine. We are made in the image of God. The soul of a human being is something incredibly beautiful. If you've ever glimpsed it in another, felt it in yourself, let alone to have seen it in full consciousness. I was given that gift many, many years ago, just once in my life, to see the soul of, they were just a group of school children in full consciousness. Incredibly beautiful. And if the light of the sacred is no longer present in life, then our life becomes completely meaningless. There's no other way to say it. Again, I can use the image of Shakespeare because he describes it in Macbeth, when Macbeth has killed the king, who symbolizes, of course, the higher self, his own divine nature, the royalty inside of him, just for greed, just for power. And there are these lines, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creep in this petty pace, till the dull end of recorded time. Life's but a walking shadow, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It means nothing in life can nourish us. Nothing in life can give the real us any meaning, any sustenance. Whatever we do, it will have no meaning because it is not sacred. Because that light has gone. Because the sacred substance in life is no longer present. The Sufis called this sacred substance in life the secret of the word kun, to be. It has to do with the feminine mystery of creation. It has to do with everything in creation being made sacred, because it carries the breath of God, if you like. It is made with the breath of God. And it is that which nourishes us, which gives us purpose, which we seek for, which gives us meaning. And as I say, there is an ecological devastation, and that is very visible. That is, you read the newspapers, it is accelerating. It is getting worse. Just earlier this year we read that as I say, the species in the ocean were depleting at a much faster rate than anybody had realized. It's accelerating, it's getting worse. It is the most visible tragedy of our time. It is in a way the one thing that really matters, much more than economic crises or political crises or whatever it is, this ecological devastation. That is what we are going to leave our children and our grandchildren. And the spiritual side of that is in a way even more devastating, because it means that life will have no purpose. If the sacred within creation goes out, if that sacred substance in creation that we were asked to nourish, we were asked to care for, that our prayers, our devotions, our practices, we're here to nourish, to make a relationship with. If that goes out, then life has no meaning. There is no purpose to being here from a spiritual perspective, because nothing in life can nourish us. Nothing in life can feed our souls. We will become hungry ghosts. And this to me is the great unspoken tragedy of the present time. The light is going out. That meaning is going. And it is not a transcendent meaning. Yes, you can go into deep states of meditation, into deep states of prayer, and you can go beyond this physical world. And you can go to where the light is always shining. I once had an experience in an aeroplane many years ago. It was very simple. Up above the clouds, the light is always shining. The sun is always shining. It's always there. You can go in deep within your own heart. It's part of our mystical heritage, to where there is just love and light. Yes. But how many people can do that? How many people have done a lifetime of spiritual practice to be able to go that deep within their own hearts? That to go beyond everything that is created into that light and love. Not so many. For most people who come into this world is where they need to be nourished. This world is where their soul needs to be fed. And if it isn't, if that secret substance has been abused, has been forgotten, has disappeared, then what is left? Not much. A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So, it's a very bleak picture, and I wish it wasn't so bleak. I don't think it is a problem, because I think we are addicted to problems. I think we have a culture that identifies a problem in order to find a solution. And I think this is a very masculine attitude, and I don't think it is appropriate for this situation which we have inherited as much as we have facilitated. And I feel this very passionately. It is not a problem. It is a situation. And what I would say is, first, we need to take responsibility for it. Just as we need to take responsibility for the outer ecological devastation that our materialistic culture has produced. There's a saying by somebody I like very much called Paul Kingsworth. He says, "We don't believe that anyone, not politicians, not economists, not environmentalists, not writers, is really facing up to the scale of this. As a society, we are still hooked on a vision of the future as an upgraded version of the present. Somehow technology or political agreements or ethical shopping or mass protest are meant to save our civilization from self-destruction. Well, we don't buy that." And that is the outer situation. And we need to take responsibility for it, because we have created it. Our materialistic culture is not sustainable. And in fact, there's this deep sadness that has to do with even the idea of sustainability or environmentalism. Paul Kingsnorth continues, he said, "Environmentalism is no longer about how to save the environment. It has instead become about how we in the developed world can save our lifestyle. Sustainability is no longer about sustaining the wild, the wilderness, the oceans. It is about how we can sustain our lifestyle. And we have to take responsibility for this situation. It is not sustainable. Our lifestyle is not sustainable. It can't continue. The world is not meant to be treated like that. And we also have to take responsibility for a materialistic culture that has forgotten the sacred in creation. We don't begin our day relating to the sacred in creation. Our whole day is not a celebration of the sacred in creation. It's not a praise of what is created. We may have moments when we try to remember, but mostly in our life we forget. So we need to take responsibility first. It is not somebody else's problem. It is what each of us who live in this materialistic culture of forgetfulness, of forgetfulness of the sacred, of forgetfulness of the light in creation, of the beauty and the wonder that belong to a world that belongs to God, have created. And then my sense is that we need to learn how to respond. It is a response. If you like, there is a call and we are the echo. Or how are we going to respond to this situation? This is much more feminine than a problem to be solved. It's not out there, it's inside of us. It belongs to us. It has to do with relationship. It has to do with feeling the relationship to the sacred within ourselves and within life. It is something so simple. You see, the reason I went back to the beginning, and it's very interesting because it's not actually, for example, in Christ's teachings, it's what certain aspects of Christianity made out of Christ's teachings. This split between heaven and earth. Actually, one of my favorite lines which I meditate on very often is from the Lord's Prayer, "May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." I think that's an incredibly powerful statement about bringing the two worlds together, not separating them, about the world of creation and the world, what the Sufis call the world of divine command, the angelic world. And the reason I went back to that moment, if you like, in our spiritual history, when a transcendent God in our consciousness took over from the immanent God, is that if there is a situation you need to respond to, you try to find the core, you try to find the root, and you try to go back there. Rumi says, return to the root of your own self. And it is that split, if you like, between spirit and matter, which is something so fundamental that, was it meant to happen? I don't know. We are the inheritors of a split between spirit and matter. It has allowed us to treat the material world as something inanimate. We can do what we like to. It has produced science. It has produced the wonders of technology, but at a terrible, terrible cost. And my sense is that we need to go back to that split and redeem that split between spirit and matter, which means very simply to make a relationship again with the sacred within ourselves and within creation. And it is strangely, in today's spiritual world, it is kind of acknowledged that we have to make a relationship to the sacred within ourselves, to find our own soul. This has become, if you like, part of our contemporary spiritual culture or heritage, is to redeem our own soul, find the sacred within ourselves, work with the light of our own spirituality. But that isn't enough, because it's what has been done to the earth that we are inheriting. And we have to make a relationship with the sacred within creation, with the soul of the world. There was an ancient tradition which said that our soul, the light of our soul, is just a spark in the light of the world soul. The world soul is actually nourished, is actually by the light of our own soul. That is, and if, as we stopped acknowledging that, so the light of the world soul receded. So it is going back to a relationship, something that really belongs to the feminine. And traditionally, of course, women carry this spark of divine light in their bodies in a way that men don't, for example. It belongs to the mystery of the feminine, the mystery of creation, that relationship between spirit and matter, how the world was created out of spirit. And we need to heal that relationship to make life sacred again. I firmly believe that only if we make life sacred again can the outer situation be healed, because you can't heal the body if the soul is sick. This is simple holistic medicine. You can deal with the symptoms, you can try to deal with the symptoms. But if the soul of a human being is sick, if the soul of a human being is dying, you can give it all the chemotherapy you like. It won't heal it. And the soul of our world is sick. The soul of our world is dying because we have treated it so badly. And yet, at the same time, that its very pain is a calling out to us. Just as when your soul is sick, it calls out. Many of you have heard that call, have responded to that call. For many people, their spiritual quest begins as a response to the call of their soul, that it needs you. It needs you to pay attention. It needs you to make your life sacred. It needs you to learn to listen to your soul, to make a relationship to your soul. This is what for many of us spiritual practice is, to make a relationship to our soul. I would just take it one step further and say, but we are part of the world soul, and the world soul needs us. It needs us to make a relationship with it. It needs us to look towards it, to make a connection between what is divine within us and what is divine within creation. It needs us to bring back this sacred substance back into life from our own soul, our own prayers, our own devotion. It is, of course, far too simple for economists and politicians who think the world needs elaborate plans to be saved. I'm a mystic, so I believe that the world needs the grace of God to be saved. And I actually believe that human beings can be the conveyors of the grace of God. It is part of the great spiritual mystery of a human being, that through a human being, the divine God can make a connection. Grace can come through a human being. And it is our responsibility to make that connection with the soul of the world, with this invisible inner presence that actually gives meaning to all of existence. It's not just the tigers who are dying, the elephants who are dying because people poach them for their ivory. It's not just the rivers that are becoming toxic or the fish that are dying. It is the soul that is dying. And it's the soul that needs our attention. Not as a mass protest, because it is always the devotion of the individual human being, those who pray for the world, those who go within their own hearts and their own souls and make that connection, make that relationship with what is sacred within themselves and within life. So that, if you like, love can flow from the soul of the human being to the soul of the world. So that love, grace, the sacred, the spiritual substance that is actually life in its essence, can come alive again in this world. I always like that line from Leonard Cohen, God is alive, magic is afoot. We've lost that magic in creation, that creation knows how to heal itself. There are tremendously powerful devas who can clear the toxicity out of the oceans if we work with them, who can help clear the pollution out of the world, out of the airs. That is not the problem. The problem is we have banished them, we have banished the sacred in creation, and we are the inheritors of this wasteland. And its soul is dying, and our souls don't even know what to do. So, there is a situation, and every situation calls a response. And all I would say is, open your hearts and listen, and be the response. Be that place where the worlds come together, where the sacred can come back into creation, back into the world, to nourish what has been abused, what has been rejected. And it is interesting because there are many indigenous cultures who are calling to us desperately to do this. There are the Kogi in South America, who they call themselves the elder brothers, and they are calling for the younger brothers to take notice, to heal the split between the worlds. And it is a call, and we can be the response. We can be this place where the worlds come together, where the sacred breathes itself back into creation. So the world does not become a hungry ghost, neither alive nor dead. That is a fate far worse than people can imagine. It means there is no purpose to life at all. No purpose to the soul coming into this world. All meaning is gone, a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And the alternative is a life that is full of meaning, that is full of the divine, that is not a light that is gone, but a light that is present, a light that comes to meet you, a light that is a relationship. So the stars above speak to the soul that is below, so that the sun, the spiritual sun is shining, not just the physical sun. So just as there can be real meetings between human beings, and many of you know the difference between just an acquaintance and a real meeting, so there can be a real meeting between us and life, in whatever way this meeting will evolve. And I think that is a very important contribution to make at this moment in time, to listen to the cry of the world, the spiritual cry of the world. The world is hungry. The world is hungry for light, for love, for attention. The world needs to be related to, creation needs to be related to. Not out there in some mega plan, because it's never out there in some mega plan, but in a simple way of just being a human being, relating to the sacred within creation, each in your own way. This afternoon I will give you a little practice to help you on that way, to, in a way, open the doors between the worlds just a little bit, so you can feel this meeting place, this way that what is within you, what is sacred within you, can meet the place in the world that is hungry for what is sacred, so a little light can be given back. It is always a response. What matters is how we respond to the call. It is something very simple. We respond to the call within our own hearts by looking towards God. But somehow we have been taught that God is up there in heaven, rather than around us as well, rather than within life, within each other. And there is this saying, I respond to the call of the caller when he calls to me. This is one of the deepest spiritual secrets. If we call out to God, human beings have this special bond, this special connection. I call it the bond with the beloved. This special connection with the Creator. If you like, we each have a direct line to God. It's in the heart. And if we call out and we say, beloved, or friend, or God, or she, or however the Sufi says, in the name of that which has no name, but who appears by whatever name you call it. Call it Jesus, call it Christ, call it God. For the Sufis it is our beloved. Beloved, help this world because it is dying. Just as you can call out to the beloved, help my own soul because it needs you. You say, help your world. It has forgotten you, but I am a place of remembrance. And then, if the beloved wills, it is always like any prayer, it is always if the beloved wills, if God wills, then grace can flow. And then our life can be a call to which there is a response. And as human beings, we are the vice-regents of the planet. We are asked to look where there is a need. If there is a sick child, you pray for the sick child, so that attention can be given, so that light can come, grace can come from the beyond, from the inner world, from the sacred, from the angels, however you call it. And the same can be done for the world, for the sacred places in creation, for the need for the world to become alive again.